So, have you ever actually stopped to think about what holds society together? I mean, really think about it. When you walk out your front door, what exactly is stopping everything from just descending into absolute chaos? Is the law just this neutral tool designed to keep us all living in perfect harmony? Or is it secretly a coercive weapon, wielded by the powerful to keep everyone else in check? It's a massive, super provocative tension right at the core of human society. And honestly, it's exactly what we're going to unpack today. Welcome to this explainer on the social foundations of law. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this material because we're going to demystify the dense, invisible rules that govern literally every single aspect of our daily lives. By the time we're done here, I promise you, you're going to look at the rules, regulations, and even the everyday customs around you in a totally different light. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, the fabric of society. 2, the great legal debates. 3, what law actually does. 4, law and social change. And finally, 5, law in the real world. Basically, we're moving logically from high-level abstract philosophy all the way down to concrete ground-level reality. Let's dive in. Starting off with Section 1, the fabric of society, unseen structures. You see, society isn't just some random crowd of people bumping into each other on the street. It's a highly complex, totally interconnected network. To understand it, we really have to look at something called social stratification. Basically, this is a situation where natural human differences and inequalities have been hardened. They've been institutionalized, creating a rigid system that determines who gets what and why. Think of it like a structural ladder of influence based on power, wealth, and prestige. It dictates our opportunities, and it's the exact stage upon which all our legal rules are ultimately written. Now, there are two totally opposite academic lenses through which scholars view this human cooperation and this ladder of influence. On one side, you've got the integration consensus view. This argues that society is actually pretty stable. It's held together by shared values. We cooperate because, at the end of the day, we agree on the basics. But on the flip side, we have the conflict coercion view. This side argues that society is literally full of dissension. Groups are constantly competing for limited resources, and we are only held together by force or coercion. And here's the kicker. How you view society completely changes how you view the law. And that brings us perfectly to Section 2, the great legal debates. What is law? Okay, this right here is the ultimate philosophical heavyweight battle. In one corner, natural law. This theory insists that law absolutely must be connected to morality. If a rule goes against universal human reason or goodness, it's not actually a law. There's a famous phrase for this: an unjust law is no law. Now, in the other corner, legal positivism. Positivists strip morality out of the equation entirely. They argue that a rule is a rule simply because a sovereign or a government made it. Good, bad, or totally ugly, if it's on the books, it's the law. No exceptions. Now, this whole idea of a higher law, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It actually evolved over centuries. It started way back in ancient Greece with guys like Plato and Aristotle. Then it moved through the Stoics and the Roman Empire. By the 13th century, it got a massive religious backing through Thomas Aquinas. Fast forward to the 17th century, it morphed into the concept of natural rights with John Locke, which, fun fact, actually inspired the American and French revolutions. And finally, it landed right here in the modern era. What's really fascinating is how a 20th century scholar named Lon Fuller modernized this whole natural law concept. He moved away from abstract morality and created what we call procedural natural law. Fuller argued that for any system to even be considered law, it has to pass 8 specific steps. The rules actually have to be understandable. They can't contradict each other, and, this is a big one, you can't punish someone retroactively for something that wasn't even a crime yesterday. If a system fails these basic procedural steps, Fuller says, well, it's just not a legal system at all. But hey, remember the positivists? They view things quite a bit differently. And Thomas Hobbes is the perfect example here. He argued that without a strong ruler, the state of nature is frankly terrifying. He famously stated that the natural life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Because of that pretty bleak outlook, Hobbes argued that humans eagerly sign a social contract. We basically surrender absolute freedom to a sovereign just to get some basic security and order. Building directly on that need for absolute order, we get John Austin's imperative theory. Austin boils the whole thing down to an incredibly blunt formula. He says law is simply orders backed by threats. That's it. It doesn't matter if the law is perfectly moral or if it followed Fuller's procedural steps. If the person in charge commands it and they have the actual power to punish you for breaking it, then boom, that is the law. Then we have another positivist, Hans Kelsen, who tried to make this even more scientific. He wanted to cut out psychology and politics entirely. So he introduced this concept called the Grundnorm, or basic norm. Think of the entire legal system as a giant pyramid, right? A parking ticket is valid because a city ordinance allows it. That ordinance is valid because a state law allows it. The state law is valid because of the Constitution. And that Constitution, that ultimate foundational rule at the very, very top of the pyramid, that is the Grundnorm. Every single legal rule in society traces back to it.
All right, so we've covered what the law is in theory. Let's shift gears to Section 3, what law actually does, functions and dysfunctions. So how does all this abstract philosophy actually operate on the ground? Well, when we look at the major functions of law, think about it like this. In a tiny village, you might control bad behavior through informal gossip or ridicule. But in a massive, super complex society, we need formal social control and dispute resolution. But the one I really want to highlight here is social engineering. This is a concept from a scholar named Roscoe Pound. He saw the law as a practical tool to consciously reconcile conflicting interests, building an efficient structure to satisfy the needs of the community. So law isn't just a boring list of don'ts, it's literally the invisible scaffolding that allows us to build complex things like contracts, marriages, and international businesses.
But what happens when society changes way faster than the rules do? That brings us to Section 4, law and social change, the chicken or the egg. There is this constant, absolutely fascinating tension between a rapidly changing culture and a really rigid legal system. And once again, we find a massive academic debate. Does the law follow change or does it lead it? A scholar named Savany argued that law must conservatively follow cultural shifts. He said it's really just a codification of customs that already exist among the people. Conversely, Jeremy Bentham argued that law should actively lead change. He thought it should be a vehicle to actually force society to evolve and bring about programmed, rational reforms. In reality, we know both happen, but the debate over which is better shapes our political world every single day. Okay, let's anchor all these grand theories into some very real, high-stakes reality. Section 5, Law in the Real World, Gender, Custom, and Development. To understand how scholars actually test these boundaries, we can look at real academic seminar questions used by university law programs. These questions force students to take these high-level theories, like natural law, positivism, or utilitarianism, and apply them to everyday scenarios, like a neighbor playing their music way too loudly, or incredibly complex constitutional rights. It really goes to show that theory is never just theory. It's a practical framework for solving actual human problems. Now, one of the most significant ways the law intersects with real life is through the lens of gender. Feminist legal theory critically examines concepts like patriarchy, which it defines as the ordering of society where standards are fixed in the interest of men. Feminist scholars point out that the law isn't actually value neutral or perfectly objective, not at all. Instead, because laws were historically written by men, the legal system inherently reflects a male perspective. This means that if we want to achieve true substantive equality, it requires actively changing the law, not just treating unequal people equally under an old set of rules. We also see theory clash with reality big time when it comes to customary law. Take the hierarchy of law in Kenya, for example. The Constitution is at the very top, written statutes are in the middle, and customary law, which are the traditional rules of indigenous communities, sits at the bottom. But here's the catch. Customary law is only applied in civil cases if it's not considered repugnant to justice and morality. Now that is a loaded phrase. This exact tension exploded in the famous SM Otieno burial dispute, where written statutory law violently clashed with customary tribal law. It really forces us to ask, whose standard of morality gets to decide what is or isn't repugnant? Finally, these legal foundations are absolutely crucial when we talk about global development. We used to think of development purely as economic GDP growth, just numbers on a page. But applying utilitarian and feminist theories has really shifted that focus towards sustainable development. Today, the law is used as a vital tool to seek broad human well-being, things like improving education, eliminating poverty, and actually empowering individuals, rather than just boosting abstract economic data on a spreadsheet. Which brings us to our final provocative thought. After looking at social stratification, positivism, natural law, and these very real-world clashes of culture, I really want to leave you with this question. Does the law shape who we are, or do we shape what the law becomes? As you go about your week, take a look at the invisible rules around you and ask yourself where they actually came from. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.